The sirens wouldn't be audible for another 45 minutes. Right now, the lobby of First National Heritage Bank was a tomb. Hushed conversations, soft, rhythmic counting of cash, silence, bought by money, cool, sterile, exclusive. But before the hour was up, that silence would break. Not with a bang, with a revelation. One that wouldn't just cost a branch manager his job, it would dismantle his entire life. The man behind the mahogany counter thought he was the predator. He had no idea. He was already the prey. To understand how a simple balance check turned into a crime scene of the soul, we have to rewind. Back to the moment. The heavy glass doors swung open. Wesley Brooks walked in. He didn't look like the typical clientele of First National. He was 10 years old, small for his age, a frame that nearly disappeared inside a thrift store windbreaker, 2 sizes too big. But it was the shoes that drew eyes. Canvas sneakers, gray with wear, rubber soles peeling away from the fabric like a scab. And when he crossed the pristine Italian marble, polished to a mirror shine, his steps made a faint, wet sound. Squeak, squeak, squeak. He approached the main counter. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. But he kept his chin up, just like she had taught him. "Excuse me, sir." Wesley's voice was soft, barely carrying over the hum of the air conditioning. "I'd like to check my account balance, please." Bradley Whitmore stopped typing. He didn't look up right away. He finished his sentence. Hit enter. Then, slowly, with the practiced lethargy of a man who believes his time is worth more than yours, he raised his eyes. Bradley was the picture of corporate success. A tailored navy suit, a silk tie knotted with geometric precision, and a heavy gold watch that cost more than the car Wesley's mother used to drive. He looked at Wesley's face. Then his eyes traveled down, to the oversized jacket, to the frayed laces, to the shoes. A smirk curled the corner of Bradley's mouth. Not a smile, a dismissal. He let out a short, sharp laugh, and it echoed off the vaulted ceiling. "Check your account?" Bradley's voice boomed, intentionally loud. He wanted the lobby to hear. He wanted an audience. "Son, look around you. This is First National Heritage. We manage portfolios, not piggy banks. The welfare office is 4 blocks down, past the subway station." Wesley swallowed hard. The lump in his throat tasted like metal. "I know where I am, sir." "I have an account here." Bradley leaned over the counter. Expensive sandalwood cologne washed over Wesley, a scent like power and judgment. "Let's cut the act. Look at those shoes. Look at you." He shook his head. "Not for Wesley, for the room. I know the game. You come in, ask for a balance on a non-existent account. Hope someone feels sorry for the poor kid and hands you a 20 just to make you leave. It's a classic." He waved a hand toward the door. The kind of gesture you'd use to shoo away a stray dog. "Get out before I call security. We have real clients, conducting real business." From the corner of his eye, Wesley saw the security guard, a burly man, thick neck. He unhooked the thumb brake on his holster and took 1 step forward. Behind him, a customer in a cashmere sweater sighed loudly. "Come on," the customer shouted, checking his watch. "Throw him out already. He's stinking up the place." Laughter rippled through the lobby. Not joyous, cold, jagged, cruel. The sound of a group deciding one person didn't belong. Not a single person stepped forward. Not the woman in pearls. Not the man in the suit. Not even the teller at the next window. Wesley felt heat rise in his cheeks, burning shame, begging him to turn and run. But then he felt something else. A weight in his pocket. A promise. "Stand your ground, Wesley. You are who I say you are, not who they say you are." He didn't run. He didn't scream. He reached into his jacket pocket. "My grandmother opened it for me," Wesley said. His voice trembled, the vibration traveling down to his fingertips. But he forced the words out. "She passed away 2 months ago. She told me to come here." He pulled out a brown manila envelope, creased at the corners. He placed it on the marble counter. Bradley rolled his eyes so hard, it looked painful. "Your grandmother," Bradley mocked him. Then he looked sideways to Chelsea Morrison, the senior teller at the next station. "Let me guess, Chelsea. Grandma left him a penthouse in Manhattan and a private island in the car IBE in?" Chelsea smirked. Her lip curled with disgust as she stamped a deposit slip. "Sir, just call the police. The kid is obviously running a scam, probably stolen documents." "Not yet," Bradley said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Let's see how far he tries to take this con." He snatched the envelope from Wesley's hands. "No care, no patience. He ripped the flap and dumped the contents onto the counter. Papers slid out, a death certificate, a letter, and then something else. Something that caught the light. It was a bank card, but not the standard blue debit card. This one looked heavier. Metal, matte black, with silver etching, the platinum reserve. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. In the banking world, this wasn't just a card. It was a key to a different kingdom. It was invitation only. It was for clients whose net worth had 2 commas, minimum. For a split second, the sneer vanished from Bradley's face, replaced by a flicker of genuine confusion. His brain tried to process what he was seeing, the poverty standing in front of him versus the wealth sitting on the counter. It didn't compute. And because Bradley Whitmore was a man who could never be wrong, his mind rejected the truth instantly. He picked up the card, holding it delicately by the corner, as if it were contaminated. "Where did you steal this?" The question hung in the air like smoke. "I didn't steal it," Wesley whispered. "It's mine." "Yours?" Bradley laughed again. But this time, it sounded forced, brittle. "You expect me to believe a kid who looks like he slept in a dumpster is holding a platinum reserve card? I've been in banking for 15 years. I know a fraud when I see one." He tossed the card back onto the counter. It hit the marble with a heavy metallic clack, like a gavel coming down. "You're lucky I don't have you arrested right now." "For possession of stolen property," Bradley hissed, leaning in close. His face inches from Wesley's, the veins in his neck pulsed. "But I'm going to be generous. I'm going to verify this. And when it comes back flagged as stolen, you're going to leave here, in the back of a squad car." Bradley pointed a manicured finger toward the far corner of the lobby, near the restrooms, near the janitor's closet, the dead zone. "Sit over there. Don't move. Don't speak to the customers. Don't even breathe too loud." Wesley took his envelope. He took the card, and he walked to the corner, head down, shoulders hunched, under the weight of 100 staring eyes. He sat on a cold, metal folding chair, isolated from the warmth and the light of the main lobby. He pulled out the letter. The handwriting was shaky, the ink slightly smeared where a hand had trembled. "My brave Wesley, never let anyone make you feel small. You are worth more than they will ever know." He read the line 3 times. He tried to breathe. He tried to stop his hands from shaking. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A cheap, cracked smartphone. A text message lit up the screen. "Uncle Lawrence, traffic is a nightmare. Stuck in a meeting uptown. Be there in 20 minutes. You doing okay, champ?" Wesley almost smiled. 20 minutes. He could survive 20 minutes. He had no idea those 20 minutes were ticking down like a bomb. From his exile in the corner, Wesley became invisible. He watched the theater of the bank unfold. He watched Bradley Whitmore transform. A white man in a golf polo walked in. Khakis, loafers, casual wealth. He arrived 15 minutes after Wesley. Bradley practically vaulted over the counter to greet him. Handshakes, offers of espresso. 0 questions about identification. "Welcome to First National, Mr. Henderson. Let's get you set up right away." Wesley watched Chelsea Morrison bring Bradley fresh coffee in a ceramic mug. They stood by the water cooler, whispering. Their eyes darted toward Wesley's corner. Chelsea covered her mouth to hide a giggle. Bradley mimicked a slumping posture, mocking the boy. They thought he was trash. They thought he was powerless. They thought he was alone. But as the minute hand on the grand wall clock ticked past the hour and the heavy oak doors began to open again, Bradley Whitmore was about to learn a painful lesson about assumptions. Because the man walking through those doors wasn't just Uncle Lawrence. And the secret inside that account wasn't just money. It was leverage. The door handle turned, the atmosphere shifted, and Wesley looked up from his letter to see a silhouette that made the security guard instinctively step back. That silhouette wasn't the cavalry. It wasn't a savior. It was Mrs. Diane Campbell, a fixture of the local country club set, wearing enough Chanel No. 5 to fumigate the lobby. The guard stepped back, not out of respect, out of habit. Mrs. Campbell was known for complaining if the help stood too close. For Wesley, the moment the heavy door clicked shut behind her was the moment hope began to curdle into dread. Mrs. Campbell finished her transaction in 3 minutes flat. She turned. Her heels clicked on the marble like a metronome, and for one brief, agonizing second, her eyes locked with Wesley's. Her face tightened, a micro-expression of discomfort, maybe even a flash of guilt. She saw a 10-year-old boy, alone in the corner, clutching a dirty envelope. She could have asked if he was okay. She could have asked the manager why a child was being treated like a vagrant. But kindness has a cost, and Diane Campbell wasn't in the mood to pay it. She clutched her designer purse tighter, as if Wesley's poverty might be contagious, and walked out. Click, click, click. The silence she left behind was louder than the noise. Wesley looked down at his hands. He unfolded the letter again. The paper was becoming soft and fuzzy at the edges, worn down by the sweat of his palms and the sheer force of his anxiety. You are braver than you believe, stronger than you seem, and loved more than you know. Grandma Eleanor used to whisper that to him when thunder shook the walls of their small apartment. She told him it was from a famous author. Winnie the Pooh, she'd say with a wink. Even bears know the truth, baby. He didn't remember the author's name, but he remembered the texture of her voice, warm like honey, safe like a fortress. Now that voice was gone, replaced by the low, mocking hum of the bank lobby. His phone buzzed against his thigh. He checked it, shielding the screen, so no one would see his cracked display. Uncle Lawrence, meeting is dragging. CEO won't shut up. 15 more minutes. Stay strong, champ. 15 minutes. It felt like 15 years. Wesley typed back a single word, okay. He didn't type, they're laughing at me. He didn't type, the manager looks at me like I'm garbage. He didn't want to worry Uncle Lawrence. He just had to hold on. 10 feet away, Jerome Davis, the security guard, shifted his weight from one foot to the other. Jerome was 55, gray dusting his temples, eyes that looked perpetually tired, a black man in a uniform that didn't pay enough for the things he had to swallow. He saw everything, the sneer on Bradley Whitmore's face, the casual cruelty of the tellers. Every instinct in Jerome's body screamed at him to intervene, to walk over, put a hand on the boy's shoulder, and tell Whitmore to back off. But Jerome had a mortgage in Queens, underwater, 2 daughters in community college, 3 years away from a pension, the only thing standing between him and a greeter job at Walmart. In this building, silence wasn't just golden, it was currency. Silence meant employment. Employment meant survival. Jerome looked at the ceiling. He looked at his shoes. He looked anywhere but at the boy, who reminded him of his own grandson. Hey, kid. The voice cut through the air like a whip crack. It had been 32 minutes. Bradley Whitmore was done waiting. He didn't call Wesley to the counter. That would imply service. Instead, he pointed to a small, exposed desk in the center of the floor, the consultation desk. Away from the coffee station, away from the comfortable armchairs. A stage. Bring your paperwork over here, Bradley commanded. Wesley stood up. His legs felt heavy, filled with lead. He walked to the desk and sat in the hard plastic chair. He placed the envelope down with the reverence of a priest handling a holy text. Bradley didn't even look at it. He leaned back in his leather chair, crossing his arms over his silk tie, staring at Wesley with the cold, dead eyes of a shark, sensing blood in the water. Let's try this again, and let's try the truth this time. Bradley projected his voice, designed to carry to the tellers, to the customers, to the cameras. You claim you have an account. You claim your grandmother left you money, but you have no state ID, no guardian, no proof of address. Frankly, son, you don't look like someone who belongs in a zip code like this, let alone a bank like this. Wesley's throat felt like it was closing up. I have my school ID, and the letter, and the card with my name on it. Bradley reached out and picked up the laminated school ID with 2 fingers, holding it by the corner, as if it were a used tissue. Lincoln Elementary, 5th grade. Bradley read it out loud, then tossed it back. It slid across the polished wood and teetered on the edge. This proves nothing. Any kid can get a school ID. It doesn't explain the platinum card. Where are your parents? The question hit Wesley like a fist to the stomach. My dad left before I was born, Wesley whispered, staring at his shoes. My mom. She died in a car accident when I was 3? And this mysterious uncle? Bradley pressed, his smirk widening. Let me guess. He's the CEO of Apple? The president? He's in a meeting, Wesley said, his voice cracking. He's coming. A meeting? Right. Bradley laughed, a dry barking sound. That's convenient. A 10-year-old boy walks in with a stolen credit card and a sob story, and his rich uncle is conveniently too busy to vouch for him. Chelsea, the head teller, drifted over. She stood behind Bradley, like a vulture waiting for scraps. She whispered something in his ear. Her eyes were gleeful and mean. Bradley nodded. He sat forward, planting his elbows on the desk. The playfulness was gone. Now, it was just malice. "I don't know what kind of scam you're running," Bradley announced, his voice booming through the lobby. "But I'm freezing this account immediately, pending a federal fraud investigation." Wesley's head snapped up. "You can't do that! That's my grandma's money. She saved her whole life." "Your grandma?" Bradley sneered. He leaned in closer, his voice dripping with venom. "Let's be real, kid. You expect me to believe a woman from your neighborhood saved up enough for a platinum tier account on a teacher's salary? Please." He paused, letting the implication hang like poison gas. "What did she really do?" Bradley asked, his eyes hard and ugly. "Did she deal? Was she running numbers? Or did she just rob a bank herself?" Something inside Wesley snapped. Not his patience. Something deeper, the sacred place where he kept his grandmother's memory. This man wasn't just insulting him now. He was defiling the only person who had ever made Wesley feel safe. But before Wesley could scream, before he could cry, Bradley stood up. He adjusted his suit jacket, smoothed his tie, and looked around the lobby to make sure he had everyone's attention. He took a breath to deliver the final blow. Humiliating. Permanent. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words never came out, because the heavy oak doors of the bank slammed open, hard enough to rattle the glass in the frames. This time, it wasn't a little old lady. A man stood in the entryway, 6'4", wearing a bespoke Italian suit that cost more than Bradley's car. And he radiated rage, so palpable it felt like the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. He didn't look at the tellers. He didn't look at the guard. He looked straight at Bradley Whitmore, and for the first time in his life, Bradley Whitmore felt true fear. The doors had slammed open, but Bradley was too intoxicated by his own performance to notice the shift. He was center stage, and he wasn't about to let a distraction ruin his finale. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for this disruption." Bradley's voice was smooth, projected, like an actor hitting his mark on Broadway. He gestured vaguely at Wesley, framing the 10-year-old boy as a security threat, not a child. This is, unfortunately, what we deal with. People who don't belong in institutions like First National, trying to take what isn't theirs. 6 customers watched the spectacle. A few nodded, their own biases quietly validated by the manager's suit and confidence. Others shifted in their loafers, eyes down, uncomfortable, but silent. Not one of them spoke. Near the vestibule, Diane Campbell stood frozen. She'd made it all the way to her Mercedes in the parking lot, key in the ignition, but the engine hadn't turned over. Something, call it guilt, call it the ghost of a conscience, had pulled her back inside. Now she clutched her purse, knuckles white, watching the scene unfold like a slow-motion car crash. She wanted to say something. She wanted to scream that he was just a boy, but the air in the bank was thick with authority. And Diane, like everyone else, remained paralyzed by it. "I don't know where you stole that card," Bradley continued, turning his back to the entrance. He pointed a manicured finger at Wesley, like a prosecutor closing a capital case. "And I don't know what kind of lies you've been fed. But hear me clearly. You are not getting a single penny from this bank. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever." Wesley stood by the plastic chair, his vision blurred. He blinked rapidly, fighting the stinging heat in his eyes. "Boys don't cry," a voice in his head whispered. His father's voice. A man he barely knew. "Boys feel, Wesley," his grandmother's voice answered, loud and clear in memory. "Feeling is strength. Numbness is for the dead." "My grandma worked 40 years, Wesley managed to say. His voice cracked, high, thin, but he forced the words through the lump in his throat. "She was a teacher at Lincoln Elementary. She saved everything for me. She promised." "Spare me the sob story," Bradley cut him off. The slap of his words echoed off the marble. "I've heard it 1,000 times. Every con artist has a dead grandmother and a tragic tale. It's boring." Bradley snapped his head toward the security guard. "Jerome, escort this kid out of my bank. Now." Jerome Davis didn't move. His feet felt nailed to the floor. He looked at Wesley, the scuffed sneakers, the trembling chin, the oversized jacket. Then he looked at Bradley, the sneer, the power, the arrogance. "Did you hear me?" Bradley's voice sharpened into a blade. "I said, now." Jerome's hand drifted to his belt. He thought about his mortgage in Queens. He thought about his daughter's tuition bill, sitting on the kitchen counter. 11 years. 11 years of biting his tongue. 11 years of watching men like Bradley Whitmore treat people like dirt because they didn't fit the premium client profile. Immigrants struggling with English, the elderly confused by the ATM, anyone who looked poor. Jerome had never spoken up. Silence was the rent payment. Silence was survival. And today was no different. Jerome took a step forward, then another. Each step, a small funeral for his self-respect. He walked toward Wesley, extending a hand, but unable to meet the boy's eyes. "Come on, son," Jerome whispered, his voice rough with shame. "Let's go." Wesley pulled back. He didn't need to be dragged. He stood up on his own, grabbing his grandmother's wrinkled letter from the desk. He pressed it against his chest like a shield, a flimsy barrier against the cruelty of the world. He turned and walked toward the exit, head high, carrying more dignity in his small frame than every adult in the room combined. But Bradley wasn't done. He needed the last word. "Next time you want to beg for money," Bradley called out to the boys retreating back, "try a homeless shelter or a street corner. That's more your natural environment." From the back of the lobby, someone laughed, loud, sharp, genuine. Wesley reached the glass doors just as his pocket vibrated. He pulled out his phone. The screen lit up. Incoming call, Uncle Lawrence. His hands shook so badly, he couldn't swipe the screen. The phone slipped from sweat-slicked fingers. It hit the marble floor with a sickening crack. Wesley froze. He stared down at the spiderweb fracture across the glass. It was too much. The shoes, the insults, the laughter, and now, this. Jerome bent down and picked up the phone. He handed it back to the boy. For a split second, their eyes locked. Wesley looked at the older man, and he didn't see authority. He saw shame, bone deep, soul-crushing. Jerome was drowning in it, pleading silently for forgiveness he knew he didn't deserve. Jerome said nothing. He let the boy walk out alone. The automatic doors whooshed shut, cutting off the noise of the street, sealing the tomb once again. Inside, Bradley adjusted his cufflinks. He flashed a winning smile at Chelsea, who was already back at her computer. "And that," Bradley said, his voice dripping with self-satisfaction, "is how you handle it. You give these people an inch, they'll take everything." Chelsea nodded, though her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Bradley turned back to the lobby, ready to apologize to the man in the bespoke suit who had entered a moment ago, the man standing silently by the door, the man who had watched the entire eviction without moving a muscle. "My apologies, sir," Bradley said, putting on his best customer service mask as he walked toward the tall stranger. "We try to keep the riffraff out, but sometimes they slip through. Now, how can I help?" Bradley stopped. The words died in his throat. He finally looked, really looked, at the man standing in the entryway. The man wasn't looking at the tellers. He wasn't looking at the brochure rack. He was looking at the cracked phone on the floor where Wesley had stood. Then, the man slowly raised his head. His eyes were dark, intelligent, and burning with a cold, terrifying rage that made Bradley's stomach drop through the floor. "You didn't just kick out the riffraff, Bradley," the man said, his voice low, dangerous, like rumbling thunder. "You just evicted the owner of this building." Bradley Whitmore thought he was invincible. He'd just cleared the floor of trash. He had the staff intimidated into silence. And he was back to managing his kingdom. So when his phone buzzed with an urgent email, he didn't even read the subject line. Subject, confidential. Q4 investor site visit, immediate prep required. Bradley swiped it away. Delete, too busy, too important. He assumed it was another corporate memo from some mid-level compliance officer in Charlotte. He was wrong. He should have read that email. He really, really should have. Because if he had, he might have recognized the name of the investor scheduled for a surprise inspection that morning. Outside, the November wind had teeth. It cut through Wesley's thin windbreaker, chilling him down to the bone. He sat on a frozen stone bench near the drive-through ATM, pulling his knees to his chest in a futile attempt to conserve heat. The manila envelope lay on the concrete beside him. The cracked phone sat in his lap. The letter, now damp, now fragile, was clenched in his fist. He stared at his shoes, the ones Bradley had laughed at, the ones the whole lobby had sneered at. $2 specials from a Salvation Army bin. He remembered the day Grandma Eleanor bought them last spring. He had recoiled, embarrassed, wanting the Nikes the other fifth graders wore. Grandma had knelt down, right there in the thrift store aisle, ignoring her bad knees to tie the laces for him. "Shoes don't make the man, baby," she had said, her eyes fierce and loving. "Character does. And you have more character in your pinky finger than most folks have in their whole bodies." She wore her own shoes until the soles flapped, fixing them with duct tape and superglue. Wesley finally understood why. Every dollar she didn't spend on herself was a dollar that went into that account. Every sacrifice, a brick in the foundation, she was building for him. A tear hit the cracked screen of his phone, then another. He wiped his face with his sleeve and tried Uncle Lawrence again, straight to voicemail. He typed a text through blurred vision. "Uncle Lawrence, they kicked me out. They said I stole Grandma's card. They called me a thief. Please come." He waited. 1 minute, the wind howled. 3 minutes. A car drove past, splashing dirty water near his feet. 5 minutes. Nothing. Uncle Lawrence was a man of his word, but he was also a man of strict professional courtesy. In a board meeting, the phone was off. Wesley was alone. No cavalry, no backup. Just a 10-year-old boy, shivering on a bench while the world kept turning. A woman in a tailored business suit walked past, talking loudly into her AirPods about a merger. She saw the crying black boy on the bench. She saw the despair. She didn't break stride. A man jogged by with a golden retriever. The dog pulled toward Wesley, sensing sadness the way animals do, wanting to offer a wet nose and a wagging tail. The man yanked the leash. "Heel buster." "Leave it." Wesley was invisible, just like inside. He unfolded the letter one last time. The ink was starting to bleed from the tears landing on the page. "My brave Wesley, the world will sometimes be cruel. People will judge you by your shoes, your clothes, the color of your skin. They will try to make you feel worthless. But you are not worthless. You are my greatest treasure. Everything I have saved, use it to fly high. Use it to prove them all wrong." One day she had promised him over chocolate chip pancakes in their tiny kitchen. "One day you'll walk into that bank and they'll treat you like a king, Wesley. They'll call you sir." Today, they called him a beggar, a con artist, garbage. Inside the glass doors, 20 feet away, Diane Campbell stood motionless, trapped in the purgatory of her own conscience. She had watched the entire scene from the warmth of the lobby. She saw the boy shivering. She saw him wiping his eyes. Every moral fiber she possessed screamed at her to go outside, to sit on that cold bench, to put an arm around him and tell him he mattered, but she couldn't move. Shame anchored her feet. What right did she have to offer comfort now? She had stood there while Bradley Whitmore eviscerated that child's dignity. She had heard the racism, the cruelty, the mockery, and she had said nothing. Her silence had been an endorsement. To walk out there now would be the ultimate hypocrisy. So she did the only thing she felt she could do. She turned her back on the window. But Jerome Davis was still watching. The security guard stood by the door, his hand resting on the cool metal of the frame. He watched Wesley shivering. He watched cars ignore him. And he felt the weight of 11 years of compromise pressing down on his chest like a slab of concrete. He looked at the boy. Then he looked at Bradley, laughing with a teller, retelling the story of his victory for a new audience. Something broke inside Jerome. Not a loud snap, a quiet, definitive shift. The mortgage didn't matter anymore. The pension didn't matter. Being able to look himself in the mirror, that mattered. Jerome took a breath. He reached for the door handle, but he never got the chance to open it because a black Lincoln Nav-I Gay Tour with tinted windows screeched into the parking lot, curbing the front tire in its haste. The driver's side door flew open before the engine even cut out. Wesley looked up, squinting through his tears. A man stepped out. He wasn't Uncle Lawrence. He was taller, older. He wore a heavy wool coat and carried a briefcase that looked like it contained nuclear codes. He didn't look at the bank. He scanned the parking lot with frantic intensity until his eyes locked on the small figure huddled on the bench. The man ran. He didn't jog. He sprinted toward Wesley, his face a mask of absolute panic. "Wesley?" the man shouted, his voice cracking against the wind. "Wesley Brooks?" Wesley nodded slowly, terrified. The man dropped to his knees, right there on the dirty asphalt, ruining his trousers. He grabbed Wesley's shoulders, not roughly, but with a desperate checking for injuries franticness. "Thank God," the man breathed. "We've been tracking your grandmother's account activity." The alert triggered. a level 1 security protocol at headquarters. He looked at the bank doors, then back at Wesley. Did they? The man swallowed hard. Did they refuse the card? He threw it at me, Wesley whispered. He said I stole it. The man closed his eyes just for a second. When he opened them, the panic was gone, replaced by cold resolve. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a phone. He dialed a single number. It's me, the man said into the receiver. Initiate the takeover. Now. And get the legal team down here. I want this branch sealed in 5 minutes. He stood up and offered a hand to Wesley. Come with me, son, the man said, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. We're going back inside. And I promise you, nobody is going to laugh this time. Jerome Davis stood at his post, but his mind was in a different zip code. His eyes kept drifting through the glass, fixing on the small, shivering figure huddled on the bench outside. His chest felt like it was being squeezed by a vice. His hands, resting by his sides, clenched and unclenched in a rhythm of helpless rage. 11 years ago, Jerome had been that boy. Different bank, different city, same script. A white manager refusing to cash a paycheck because he didn't look like an architect. A security guard tailing him through a department store just for browsing. A landlord suddenly remembering the apartment was taken the moment he saw Jerome's face. 1,000 small cuts, a lifetime of bleeding out in slow motion. And now Jerome was the one in the uniform. He was the one following orders. He was the enforcer of the very system that had tried to crush him. If his younger self could see him now, he'd spit on the floor. Jerome took a step toward the door. Just one step. Maybe he could just... Jerome. Bradley's voice cracked through the air like a whip. Stop daydreaming. There's a delivery at the rear bay. Handle it. Jerome hesitated. 1 second. 2 seconds. The rebellion died in his throat, suffocated by the mortgage, the tuition, the fear. He turned and walked toward the back. The moment passed. He had failed the test. Outside, the wind picked up. But Wesley wasn't going to be alone for much longer. A black Mercedes S-Class swept into the lot, moving with the silent predatory grace of a shark. It curved near the entrance, bypassing the designated spots entirely. The driver's door opened, and the atmosphere shifted. Instantly, Lawrence Brooks stepped out. He was 6'2", wearing a bespoke silver-gray suit that cost more than Bradley Whitmore made in a quarter. Silver touched his temples, lending him an aura of gravitas that made people instinctively straighten their spines. He didn't look like an uncle. He looked like a titan of industry. He spotted Wesley immediately. His nephew, his late sister's only child, the last living piece of Eleanor left on this earth, sitting on a cold bench, crying, clutching a crumpled letter like a lifeline. Lawrence's jaw tightened. A single muscle twitched beneath his left eye, the only visible crack in his composure. The fury building inside him was nuclear, but he capped it tight. He walked to the bench and knelt on the dirty asphalt, disregarding the $1,000 trousers, bringing himself down to Wesley's eye level. "Hey, champ," Lawrence said. His voice was soft, a gentle contrast to the cruelty of the last hour. "I'm here now." Wesley looked up, his face streaked with tears and snot, crumpled completely. "Uncle Lawrence." He threw himself into his uncle's arms, sobbing against the expensive wool blend. Lawrence didn't flinch. He didn't care about the suit. He held his nephew tight, rocking him slightly, letting the boy purge the poison until the shaking subsided. "Tell me what happened," Lawrence whispered. Wesley told him. Everything. The welfare office comment, the laughter, the way Bradley had thrown the card, the way the customers had watched. Lawrence listened in absolute silence. His face remained a mask of calm control, but his eyes grew darker with every sentence, harder, colder. He was cataloging every insult, filing away every slight for the reckoning to come. When Wesley finished, Lawrence stood up slowly. "You did nothing wrong," he said, his voice firm as bedrock. "Do you understand me? None of this is your fault. They were wrong, and they are about to find out exactly how wrong." He reached out and took Wesley's hand. "Come on." Wesley pulled back, digging his heels into the pavement. Terror flashed in his eyes. "I don't want to go back in there." "Please, Uncle Lawrence. Please." Lawrence stopped. He knelt again, holding Wesley's gaze. "I know, champ. I know it's scary, but sometimes we have to face the people who hurt us." He squeezed Wesley's small hand. Not to fight them, not to yell at them, but to show them they couldn't break us, that we are still standing. that they have no power over us. Wesley looked at the glass doors. He thought about Grandma Eleanor. Dignity is not given, it is carried. Okay, Wesley whispered, okay. As they turned toward the entrance, a second vehicle tore into the lot, a luxury SUV with tinted windows. It screeched to a halt next to the Mercedes. A woman stepped out, Patricia Edwards, regional director for First National Heritage. She had been en route to a routine site visit when her personal cell rang. It was Lawrence Brooks, CEO of Meridian Capital Holdings, the bank's largest institutional investor. He explained the situation in exactly 60 seconds. Calm, factual, devastating. Patricia made an illegal U-turn across 3 lanes of traffic to get here. Now she approached Lawrence, face pale. "Mr. Brooks," she said, breathless, "I cannot tell you how sorry I am. This is completely unacceptable. Completely." Lawrence's expression didn't soften by a millimeter. "We'll discuss what's acceptable. Inside," he said coldly. He turned back to the bank. Inside, Bradley Whitmore was laughing with a client. Blissfully unaware, the roof was about to cave in. Lawrence pushed the door open, held it for Wesley, and walked into the lobby like he owned the place. Because, in a way, he did. And he was about to foreclose on Bradley's career. Lawrence held the door, but he wasn't looking at the bank interior. He was looking at his nephew. "My nephew deserves an apology," Lawrence said, his voice low enough that only Patricia Edwards could hear it. "And I want to see exactly who we're dealing with." Patricia nodded, her face grim. "Of course. Whatever you need." They moved toward the entrance in a phalanx. Lawrence on the left, Patricia on the right. 10-year-old Wesley Brooks in the center. Wesley's heart hammered against his ribs so hard he could feel the pulse in his throat. His legs felt like rubber, threatening to buckle with every step. 30 minutes ago, he walked out of these doors, feeling like trash. Now he was walking back in, with his hand enveloped in the warm, firm grip of his uncle, flanked by a woman whose mere presence made the air feel thinner. He didn't understand the corporate politics, the hierarchy, the stakes, but he understood one thing. The ground beneath his feet had shifted. He wasn't walking into a bank anymore. He was walking into an arena. The automatic doors slid open with a soft whoosh. The lobby fell silent. Not the polite silence of business, the heavy, suffocating silence of impending doom. Every head turned. Bradley Whitmore saw Patricia first. The blood drained from his face so fast it looked like a magic trick. He went from sun-kissed arrogance to chalk-white terror in a heartbeat. Regional director, unannounced visit, catastrophe. Bradley scrambled out from behind the counter, practically tripping over his own feet. He adjusted his tie with shaking hands, forcing a VIP smile onto his face. A rictus of panic. "Miss Ewards!" Bradley's voice was too loud, too eager, cracking slightly on the second syllable. "What a wonderful surprise. We weren't expecting you until..." "Plans changed," Patricia said. Her voice was 0 Kelvin. It could have frozen vodka. Then Bradley's eyes slid to the man standing beside her. Tall, distinguished, wearing a suit that cost more than Bradley's entire wardrobe. And holding that man's hand, Bradley's stomach dropped through the floor. It was the kid, the black kid in the thrift store jacket, the one he had called a thief, the one he had mocked for the entertainment of the lobby. He was back, and he was holding hands with a man who didn't just have money, he had power. "I'd like to introduce you to someone," Patricia announced, her voice projecting clearly across the silent room. "This is Lawrence Brooks, founder and CEO of Meridian Capital Holdings." The name hit Bradley like a blow to the solar plexus. Meridian Capital, the bank's largest institutional investor, the entity that owned 34% of the parent company's stock, the man who could end a career with a single text message while eating lunch. And that man was holding the hand of the boy Bradley had just destroyed. "I believe you've already met my nephew," Lawrence said, quietly. He stepped aside. Wesley stood there, his eyes still red-rimmed, his grandmother's crumpled letter still clutched to his chest like a holy relic. But he wasn't hunching anymore. His chin was up, his shoulders were back. Bradley's face cycled through emotions like a malfunctioning slot machine. Confusion, recognition, dawning horror, pure, unadulterated terror. I didn't." Bradley stammered. His hands fluttered, uselessly. "If I had known who he was, that," Lawrence said, his voice smooth and deadly, "is exactly the problem. Isn't it?" Behind the counter, Chelsea Morrison dropped her pen, It clattered against the marble like a gunshot. The sound echoed in the vaulted ceiling. Jerome Davis, standing near the back, felt something shift in his chest. A feeling that had been dead for 11 years began to stir. Dark, grim, satisfaction. Near the entrance, Diane Campbell pressed both hands over her mouth. Tears streamed down her face, watching the reckoning she had been too cowardly to initiate. Every single person in that lobby was watching. The customers who had laughed, the employees who had enabled, the bystanders who stayed silent. They were all witnesses now. Lawrence released Wesley's hand, and he walked toward Bradley, slowly. No rush, just the deliberate, terrifying pacing of a predator who knows the cage is locked. Bradley took a step backward. His back hit the marble counter. Thud, nowhere to run. "Mr. Whitmore," Lawrence said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The entire lobby was holding its breath. "My nephew came here today to check his account balance. His grandmother, my mother, left him that money as his inheritance. It is legally his, every penny. Can you explain to me why he was denied service?" Bradley's mouth opened and closed like a fish on a dock. "There were irregularities. We were just following standard protocol. Security measures. What irregularities?" Lawrence cut in. His tone stayed calm, controlled, clinical. Somehow, that made it worse. "The account is properly documented. The funds have been verified by your own system. What specific irregularity justified treating a 10-year-old child like a criminal?" I didn't realize," Bradley whispered, sweat beaded on his forehead. "If I had known who he was." "You keep saying that," Lawrence said, stepping closer, invading Bradley's personal space. Bradley tried to press himself into the mahogany, but the wood wouldn't yield. "You didn't know who he was, so you decided he was nobody," Lawrence continued, his voice hardening into diamond. "You saw a black kid in worn-out shoes, and you made a judgment. Not about protocols, not about policies. You made a judgment about who deserves to be treated like a human being." The words landed like hammer blows. "My mother worked 40 years as an elementary school teacher," Lawrence said, his eyes drilling into Bradley's soul. "She rode the bus until she was 70 because she never wanted to waste money on a car. She saved every dollar so this boy could have a future. And you looked at him and saw trash." Lawrence reached into his inside pocket. Bradley flinched, expecting a weapon. Instead, Lawrence pulled out a folded document. He held it up for the room to see. "This is the trust agreement my mother signed," Lawrence said. "Do you know what the primary clause is regarding the custody of these funds?" Bradley shook his head, unable to speak. "It says the funds can be moved at any time, without penalty, if the beneficiary feels unsafe or disrespected." Lawrence's eyes flashed. "And Mr. Whitmore, I think we've established that he feels both." He turned to Patricia Edwards. "Miss Edwards, effective immediately, Meridian Capital is triggering the bad faith clause in our investment contract. We are withdrawing our support from this branch." A collective gasp went through the room. That wasn't just a reprimand. That was a death sentence. "And one more thing," Lawrence added, turning back to Bradley, whose knees were visibly shaking. "I want you to look at my nephew. Really look at him, this time. And I want you to apologize. Not to me, to him." Bradley looked at Wesley. The boy who had been invisible was now the most powerful person in the room. But before Bradley could open his mouth, Wesley stepped forward. He walked right up to the man who had humiliated him, looked him in the eye, and asked a question that would haunt Bradley Whitmore for the rest of his life. "Why?" Wesley asked softly. "Why did you hate me before I even spoke?" The question hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. "Why did you hate me before I even spoke?" Bradley Whitmore had no answer. His mouth opened, but only a dry click emerged. He could manipulate numbers, policies, people, but he had no script for raw truth from a 10-year-old. Lawrence didn't let the silence linger. He stepped in, calm, but vibrating with suppressed fury. "My mother wore the same winter coat for 15 years, Lawrence said, addressing the room as much as Bradley. "She clipped coupons. She ate store-brand soup. She fixed her own plumbing to save a handyman fee. If she had walked in here today, in her old coat and her worn shoes, you would have treated her exactly the same way. You would have laughed. You would have pointed to the door." Bradley stared at the floor, his face burning. "She deserved better," Lawrence said, his voice dropping an octave. Just like Wesley. Just like every single human being who walks through those glass doors, expecting service, not judgment. Lawrence turned to Patricia Edwards. Before we discuss the legal fallout, I want Mr. Whitmore to see exactly what he tried to throw away. Patricia nodded, her lips pressed into a thin, white line. Lawrence walked to the main counter, keeping a firm grip on Wesley's hand. They approached Chelsea Moore & Sons station. The head teller, who had been snickering into her coffee mug 20 minutes ago, now looked like she was about to vomit, her face the color of old parchment. "Pull up my nephew's account," Lawrence commanded. It wasn't a request. Chelsea looked at Patricia for help. Patricia gave a single, sharp nod. Trembling fingers danced over the keyboard. Click, clack, click. The system whirred. The screen refreshed. Everyone, the tellers, the lingering customers, Jerome the guard, leaned in, holding their breath. And there it was, account balance, $487,263.14. Almost $500,000. It wasn't inheritance from a rich uncle. It wasn't lottery winnings. It was 40 years of a public school teacher's life. Every birthday check tucked inside a card, every Christmas bonus, every summer spent tutoring algebra in a sweltering library. Every dollar Eleanor Brooks had earned, saved, and sacrificed, she poured into that account. All for Wesley. Bradley stared at the monitor. His face went gray. His brain tried to reconcile the number with the boy's shoes. The dissonance was almost paralyzing. "You laughed at his sneakers," Lawrence said quietly. "But you stopped laughing when you saw the balance." He pointed a finger at the glowing green figures. "That number represents my mother's life. She rode the bus in the rain until she was 70, so Wesley could go to college, debt-free. She ate rice and beans for dinner, so Wesley would never have to worry about rent. She denied herself every luxury this world offers, so he could have a future." Lawrence paused, letting the weight of the sacrifice crush the room. "And you almost took that away from him, because you didn't like his shoes." Bradley finally found his voice. It came out cracked, desperate, a wheeze of a dying career. I didn't know. If I had known there was that much money involved, and that," Lawrence cut him off, his voice sharp as a scalpel, "is the real problem. You would have treated him like a prince if you knew he was rich. Your respect has a price tag, but human dignity doesn't." He looked at the screen one last time, then down at Wesley. "My mother always told me a person who treats the waiter differently than the CEO has no character at all. Today, Mr. Whitmore, you showed your true character to the entire city." Bradley stood frozen, a man watching his life disintegrate in real time. 15 years climbing the ladder, the corner office, the company lease on the odd E, the networking dinners, all of it crumbling into dust because he judged a book by its cover. "I can explain," Bradley whispered, pleading with Patricia. Patricia Edwards stepped forward. Her heels clicked against the marble like a judge's gavel. "Bradley, my office. Now." Bradley didn't move. His legs felt like concrete. "Bradley," she repeated, her voice pure ice and iron. He blinked, looking from Patricia to Lawrence and finally to Wesley, the boy whose grandmother had trusted him with her legacy, the boy he had tried to erase. "You'll have the opportunity to explain," Patricia said, "in private. And then you'll have the opportunity to clear out your desk." She turned and marched toward the glass-walled offices in the back. Bradley followed on unsteady legs, a dead man walking. Lawrence watched them go, his expression unreadable. Then he knelt beside Wesley. "You okay, champ?" Wesley nodded slowly, eyes still glued to the computer screen. He touched the glass, tracing the numbers. "Grandma saved all that for me?" he whispered. "Every single penny," Lawrence said softly. "She started that account the day you were born. She deposited money every single month. She never missed once, even when times were hard, even when she was sick." Wesley felt a tear slide down his cheek. He wiped it away and felt something return. Warmth where the cold shame had been. But the reckoning wasn't over yet. Lawrence stood up and turned around. He scanned the lobby. His eyes landed on the security guard, standing by the door. Jerome Davis. Jerome stiffened. He saw Lawrence walking toward him. The CEO of Meridian Capital, the man who had just dismantled the branch manager. Jerome wanted to run. He wanted to hide, but he couldn't move. He watched as Lawrence stopped 2 feet in front of him, staring at his name tag. Jerome, Lawrence said, his voice unreadable. You were standing right here. You saw everything. Jerome nodded, shame burning his neck. Yes, sir. You saw a grown man humiliate a child, Lawrence continued, and you did nothing. I have a family, sir, Jerome stammered. I couldn't risk my job. Lawrence looked at him for a long moment. Then he reached into his jacket pocket. I understand fear, Jerome, I really do. But fear is a reason, not an excuse. Lawrence pulled out a business card. Thick, heavy stock, embossed silver lettering. You failed today, Lawrence said, but my mother believed in second chances. Meridian Capital needs head of security for our downtown headquarters. The pay is triple what you make here. Full benefits, college tuition assistance for your kids. Jerome's mouth fell open. He stared at the card. Sir? But there's a condition, Lawrence said, his eyes locking onto Jerome's. If you take this job, you will never, ever be silent again. If you see something wrong, you speak up, even if it costs you. Do we have a deal? Jerome looked at the card. Then he looked at Wesley. He took the card with a trembling hand. Yes, sir, Jerome whispered. We have a deal. Lawrence nodded. Good. Now let's get out of here. They walked out of the bank, leaving the silence behind them. But as the heavy doors closed, Wesley looked back one last time. He saw Chelsea Morrison staring at the empty manager's office. He saw the customers whispering, and he realized something. The money hadn't changed him. The money had changed them. He squeezed his uncle's hand. Uncle Lawrence? Yeah, champ? What happens to the money now? Lawrence smiled, opening the car door for him. Whatever you want, kid. But first, I think we need to make a stop. Where? Lawrence looked at Wesley's worn-out sneakers. To get you some shoes, Lawrence said. Not because you need them to be respected, but because you've walked a long way today. And you've got a lot further to go. As the Mercedes pulled away, leaving First National Heritage Bank in the rearview mirror, neither of them noticed the black sedan parked across the street. The window rolled down just an inch. A camera lens poked out, snapping a rapid sequence of photos. The man inside the sedan picked up his phone. Yeah, I found the kid, the voice hissed. And you're not gonna believe who just picked him up. The price just went up. Double. He hung up and started the engine. The Mercedes turned left. The sedan followed. The Mercedes S-Class hummed as it merged onto the freeway. A steel cocoon of silence and leather. But Wesley wasn't looking out the window at the passing city. He was looking at his hands. Hands that now, technically, held $500,000. She never had nice things, Wesley whispered, more to himself than his uncle. Her apartment was so small. The TV took 5 minutes just to turn on. Her winter coat, the zipper was broken for 3 years. Lawrence kept his eyes on the road, but his grip on the steering wheel tightened. That's what love looks like sometimes, Wesley. Sacrifice. It's putting someone else's future ahead of your own comfort. Wesley closed his eyes. He saw Grandma Eleanor clearly, reading glasses held together with Scotch tape. Dinners of generic mac and cheese. That smile, when she'd say she wasn't hungry, so he could have seconds. She could have lived in comfort. She could have had heat that actually worked. Instead, she chose him. I'm gonna make her proud, Wesley vowed, small voice, fierce. I promise. You already have, champ, Lawrence said softly, checking the rearview mirror. You already have. But back at First National Heritage, the reckoning wasn't over. It was just getting started. Inside the glass-walled office at the back of the branch, the temperature seemed to have dropped. 20 degrees. Patrish Edwards sat in the high-backed leather chair. Bradley's chair. Lawrence stood by the window, arms crossed, a silent, brooding witness to the execution. Bradley Whitmore sat in the visitor's chair, the cheap one, the one with the thin padding where people sat when they came to beg for loans. I've already reviewed the security footage, Patricia said, without preamble. She spun her laptop around and pressed play. Bradley was forced to watch himself in high definition. He saw the sneer. He heard the laughter. He watched himself point a finger at a 10-year-old boy and announce to the lobby that black kids from the projects didn't belong in a real bank. His own voice, his own words, his own cruelty, captured forever in digital amber. You violated 3 core company policies, Patricia said. Her tone was clinical, like a surgeon outlining a tumor. Discrimination based on race and appearance, denial of service without legitimate cause, and falsification of official records. Bradley's head jerked up. Falsification? You filed an incident report 23 minutes ago, Patricia said, pulling up a document on the screen. It states that Wesley Brooks was aggressive, threatening, and refused to provide proper identification. It claims you feared for the safety of your staff. She looked at him over the rim of her glasses. The footage shows a polite 10-year-old boy asking to check his balance. It shows you laughing at him. It shows you insulting his grandmother. It shows you having him physically removed. I was protecting the bank's interests, Bradley blurted, desperate. You were protecting your prejudices, Patricia corrected, slamming the laptop shut. There is a significant difference. She stood up and walked around the desk, looming over him like a judge delivering a death sentence. Effective immediately, you are suspended without pay. Your Q4 bonus, all $35,000 of it, is forfeit. A full HR investigation will begin at 0800 hours tomorrow. If it confirms discriminatory intent, and looking at this footage, it will. Termination for cause will follow. Bradley's face crumbled like wet paper. 15 years. I gave this bank 15 years. And in 15 years, Patricia shot back. You should have learned that every customer deserves basic respect. Get out. She opened the door. Security will escort you to collect your personal belongings. Your access credentials have already been revoked. Bradley stood on legs that felt like gelatin. He looked at Lawrence one last time, searching his eyes for mercy, for understanding, for anything other than judgment. He found nothing but a cold, hard wall. If he wasn't your nephew, Bradley whispered, a final, pathetic defense, you wouldn't even be here. You're right, Lawrence said. His voice was quiet, but it hit like a wrecking ball. If he wasn't my nephew, he would have walked out with nothing. He would have filed a complaint that would have been ignored. He might have called a lawyer who would have told him it wasn't worth the legal fees. Lawrence stepped closer, invading Bradley's space. That is exactly the problem, Mr. Whitmore. He shouldn't need me to be treated like a human being. No one should. Bradley had no response. He turned and walked out of his own office, past his own employees who refused to meet his eyes, through his own lobby where he'd been king an hour ago. He was gone. But the cleaning of the house wasn't finished. Chelsea Morris' son, Patricia called out. The head teller stood up, slowly. She walked into the meeting room like she was walking to the gallows. She sat in the same chair Bradley had just vacated. You didn't start this, Patricia said, her voice softer but no less firm. But you participated in it. You smirked, you laughed, you reinforced Mr. Whitmore's behavior. You failed to intervene when a child was being abused right in front of your station. Chelsea's mascara had turned into black rivers running down her cheeks. She was shaking. I knew it was wrong, Chelsea sobbed, her voice cracking. I just didn't want to make trouble. I didn't want him to turn on me. Silence is complicity, Chelsea, Patricia said. You're on probation, mandatory sensitivity training. One more strike, and you're out. Chelsea left the office, weeping into a tissue. And then Lawrence's phone buzzed in his pocket, a text from his private security team. Lawrence, we have a problem. The car that was tailing you, we ran the plates. It's not Papa Rotzi. It's a rental, registered to a shell company in Delaware. Lawrence frowned. Who is it? He typed back. The reply came 3 seconds later. We don't know yet, but they just sent a photo of Wesley to a burner phone in Mexico. Whoever this is, they aren't looking for an autograph. Get the boy to the safe house, now. Lawrence looked in the rearview mirror at Wesley, peacefully looking out the window, dreaming of the shoes he was about to buy. Change of plans, champ, Lawrence said, swerving the car across 2 lanes of traffic toward the highway exit. We're not going to the shoe store just yet. Why? Wesley asked, sensing the tension in the sudden maneuver. Where are we going? Lawrence checked the mirror again. The black sedan was still there, 3 cars back, matching his speed. Somewhere safe, Lawrence said, hitting the gas. Hold on. Back inside. Silence is not neutral, Mrs. Morey's son, Patricia Edwards said, sliding a thick file across the polished mahogany. Silence is a choice, and like any choice, it has a price tag. Chelsea Morrison stared at the disciplinary paperwork, formal reprimand, mandatory bias training, a permanent black mark in her personnel file. 0 tolerance for any future infractions. She didn't argue. She didn't make excuses. She just nodded through her tears and signed her name. She had learned a lesson today. It had cost her dignity, but at least it hadn't cost her livelihood. Yet. Outside the office, near the heavy glass doors, a quieter confrontation was taking place. Jerome Davis stood face to face with Lawrence Brooks. This wasn't a meeting of corporate titans. It was just two men, stripped of pretense. "You picked up his phone when he dropped it," Lawrence said, his voice even. "You handed it back to him." Jerome looked at the floor. It wasn't enough. "No," Lawrence agreed. No cheap comfort. It wasn't. But it was something. A small kindness, in a moment when he had none. "I should have done more," Jerome whispered. Regret thick in his throat. "I should have stepped in." "I should have." "You should have," Lawrence cut in. He held Jerome's gaze steadily. "We can list the should-haves all day. The only question that matters now is, what will you do next time?" Jerome thought about his mortgage. He thought about his daughters in college. Then he thought about Wesley, 10 years old, shivering on a bench, wiping his eyes with a thrift store jacket sleeve. "Next time," Jerome said, his voice hardening, "I speak up. No matter what." Lawrence nodded. He extended his hand. "Good." Jerome shook it. It wasn't absolution. It wasn't forgiveness. It was a contract with his own conscience. A promise he intended to keep, even if it meant burning his world down. As Lawrence and Wesley turned to leave, a voice stopped them. Wait. It was strangled. Desperate. Diane Campbell stood near the brochure rack. She had waded through the shouting, the firing, the collapse of Bradley's kingdom. Her eyes were red-rimmed. Her hands trembled as she clutched her Prada bag. "Please," she whispered. They stopped. Diane approached slowly, like she was walking to an execution. "I'm so sorry," she blurted out. "I was there. I saw everything. I should have defended you. But I stood there, like a coward." Wesley looked at her. This was the woman whose heels had clicked away when he needed help. The woman who watched him, being treated like garbage and did nothing. He thought about Grandma Eleanor. "Forgiveness isn't for them, baby. It's for you. It's how you set yourself free." "You came back," Wesley said quietly. "That matters." Diane's tears spilled over. "I'm filing a formal complaint. As a witness. Everything I saw. Everything they said. It goes on the record." Lawrence raised an eyebrow. "That takes courage, Mrs. Campbell. It takes less courage than your nephew showed today," Diane said, looking at Wesley with genuine awe. He stood there and took everything they threw at him. He didn't run. He didn't scream. He endured it with dignity. "I don't know if I could have done that." Wesley didn't have a sophisticated answer. He just said the only thing that felt true. "Thank you for coming back." Diane wiped her eyes, nodded once, and walked straight to the customer service desk to dictate her statement. One small act of courage. It was a start. The fallout was swift and brutal. By closing time, the news had spread through the local banking community like a virus. Bradley Whitmore, 15-year veteran, rising star, terminated for cause. The official reason, violation of company policy. The real reason, whispered in break rooms and texted between tellers across the state. He mocked a kid. Turns out, the kid's uncle owns the bank. By the next morning, it was regional news. By the following week, national. The details were redacted to protect Wesley. But the core story went viral. Bank manager fired for discriminating against child heir. Bradley's termination was finalized in 72 hours. No severance, no letter of recommendation, no golden parachute. 15 years of career building vaporized in 15 minutes of prejudice. He applied to other banks. The interviews were short, the rejections instant. Word travels fast in finance. He ended up managing a check cashing store in a strip mall 3 towns over, a place with bulletproof glass and flickering neon lights, serving the exact same people he used to mock. Some called it karma. Others called it poetic justice. Bradley called it nothing. He just kept his head down and counted the cash. Chelsea, Maury's son, kept her job. Barely. She completed every module of sensitivity training. She showed up early. She stayed late. She never smirked at a customer again. 6 months later, she transferred. 6 months after that, she quit banking entirely. She went back to school and became a social worker. She spent her days helping families navigate systems designed to exclude them, the very systems she had once enforced. The irony wasn't lost on her. Neither was the lesson. And Jerome? 3 weeks after the incident, Jerome Davis faced his first test, A young Hispanic woman came into the bank, nervous, clutching a stack of papers. Her English was broken, her explanation stumbling. A new teller, young, impatient, eager to get to lunch, was getting frustrated. His sighs grew louder. His eye rolls became obvious. Jerome watched from his post. He felt the old fear, the mortgage, the tuition, the pension. Then he remembered the deal. Jerome walked over. Is there a problem here? The teller started to complain. She can't explain what she wants. And I have a line forming. Stop, Jerome said. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the noise like a knife. This woman is a customer. She deserves patience and respect. Help her properly, or I will find someone who can. The teller's eyes went wide. He looked at Jerome, then at the woman. He swallowed hard. I'm sorry. Let's start over, ma'am. Jerome nodded and went back to his post. He checked his watch. His shift was almost over. But as he looked out the window, he saw something that made his blood run cold. Across the street, parked in the same spot as 3 weeks ago, was a black sedan. But this time, the window was down. And the man inside wasn't taking photos. He was holding a phone to his ear, staring directly at the bank entrance. Jerome's phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. You think you're a hero now, Jerome? You think Lawrence Brooks can protect you? Watch your back. Jerome looked up. The sedan peeled away into traffic. He realized then the war wasn't over. It had just moved to a new battlefield, and Wesley was still the target. Jerome Davis stood by the automatic doors, his hands still tingling from the handshake with Lawrence Brooks. For 11 years, he had felt like he was holding his breath underwater. Mortgage pressure, fear pressure, crushing the air out of his lungs. But as the Mercedes pulled away, Jerome exhaled, a deep, shuddering breath, the kind that hurts because your chest isn't used to expanding that far. He had spoken up. Finally, it wasn't a roar, it was a quiet promise made to a powerful man. But more importantly, a promise made to the man in the mirror. He checked his reflection in the glass. The uniform was the same, the badge was the same, but the eyes staring back looked different. They looked awake. Never again, Jerome whispered to the empty lobby. Next time, I burn the whole house down. The firing of Bradley Whitmore was just the opening shot. Pa Trish Edwards wasn't interested in a PR Band-Aid. She wanted surgery. She didn't return to her regional office the next day. She set up a temporary command center right there in Bradley's old office. The first thing she did was remove his nameplate and throw it in the trash can with a clang that made the entire staff jump. Within 3 months, she had turned the region upside down. It started with the Zero Tolerance Initiative. It wasn't just a memo. It was a regime change. Mandatory bias training for every employee, from the janitors to the loan officers. Not a generic online quiz. Grueling, face-to-face workshops that forced people to confront the ugly things living in their subconscious. Then came the mystery shoppers. Patricia hired actors, diverse actors, Black grandmothers in Sunday hats, Latino teenagers in hoodies, white men in construction gear. They were sent into branches across the state with hidden microphones. If a teller smiled at the construction worker but frowned at the teenager, they were written up. If a manager made someone wait 10 minutes without an acknowledgement, they were put on probation. She mounted a small, brushed steel plaque at the entrance of every single branch under her command. It didn't list interest rates. It didn't list hours of operation. It had one sentence engraved in bold lettering. Every person who enters this door deserves respect. It wasn't a revolution. It wouldn't fix centuries of systemic racism overnight. But in this one corner of the banking world, the atmosphere had shifted. The air was cleaner. But Patricia had one more move to make, a personal one. She called Lawrence Brooks on a Tuesday afternoon. Lawrence, she said, skipping the pleasantries, I'm not satisfied. You fired the manager and retrained the staff. Patricia, Lawrence said. What else do you want? Discipline is about punishing the past, she said. I want to build a future. I want to honor your mother's legacy properly. A plaque isn't enough. An apology isn't enough. I want to know, what would Eleanor have wanted? Lawrence sat in his penthouse, looking at a photo of his mother. He thought about the 40 years she spent in a classroom. He thought about the students she bought lunch for out of her own pocket. She would have wanted to help. The next version of her, Lawrence said softly. A week later, they announced it. The E. Eleanor Brooks Future Educators Grant, fully funded, by First National Heritage Bank, but administered by an independent community foundation to ensure no corporate interference. 2 full-ride scholarships awarded every single year. Tuition, books, housing, a living stipend. The criteria were specific. The recipients had to come from the same underserved zip code where E. Eleanor had taught, and they had to be pursuing a degree in education. Teachers teaching future teachers, a ripple effect that would outlast them all. When Lawrence sat Wesley down to tell him, the boy went quiet. They were in Wesley's bedroom. Late afternoon sun cut through the blinds, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. "They named it after her?" Wesley asked, his voice barely a whisper. "They did," Lawrence said, "and I made sure of one thing. You're on the advisory board. You help pick the winners." Wesley looked at the framed photo on his dresser. Grandma Eleanor smiling that smile that could light up a rainy Tuesday, wearing the coat with the broken zipper. "She would have cried," Wesley said. He touched the glass. "Happy tears." "Yeah," Lawrence choked out, "she would have." Wesley stood up and walked to his closet. He rummaged in the back, past the new NY keys Lawrence had bought him, past the dress shoes for church. He pulled out a shoebox. Inside were the sneakers. The canvas was gray and stained. The rubber soles were peeling. The laces were frayed to threads. The shoes Bradley Whitmore had laughed at. The shoes that had almost cost him his dignity. Wesley placed them on the shelf right next to the photo of his grandmother. "Champ?" Lawrence asked. "You want me to throw those out? Get you some storage space?" Wesley shook his head. He ran his thumb over the cracked leather. "No," Wesley said firmly. "I'm keeping them." "Why?" "Because," Wesley said, looking at his uncle with eyes far older than 10. "I never want to forget. She bought these with her last $2. These shoes, they're worth more than the money in that account." Lawrence nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "You're right. They stay." But the world outside wasn't done with the story yet. 3 weeks after the incident, a video surfaced. It wasn't the security footage. Patricia had that, locked in a digital vault. This was cell phone footage, shaky, vertical, filmed from behind a potted plant in the lobby. It had been recorded by a young professional, a guy in his 20s, the kind who lived for likes and engagement. He started filming when Bradley raised his voice, thinking he was capturing some care-in drama for TikTok laughs. But he had kept filming. He captured Lawrence's arrival. He captured the revelation of the account balance. He captured the total dismantling of Bradley Whitmore's ego. Originally, the guy planned to post it with a snarky caption. But then he went home. He watched it again and again. He saw himself in the reflection of the glass, standing there, holding a phone, doing absolutely nothing, while a child was humiliated. Guilt is a powerful acid. It ate at him for 21 days. It kept him awake at night. Finally, he posted it, but not as a joke. He uploaded the video with a new intro, his own face pale, serious, looking directly into the camera. "I was there that day," the stranger confessed. "I watched a bank manager destroy a 10-year-old boy for wearing old shoes. And you know what I did? I filmed it. I thought it was content. I thought it was entertainment." He paused, looked down, ashamed. "I was wrong. I was part of the problem. That kid showed more courage in his pinky finger than I have in my whole body. So I'm posting this as a warning. If you see something like this, don't just watch. Don't film. Speak up, because silence makes you an accomplice. I learned that the hard way. Don't be like me." The video didn't just go viral. It went nuclear. 3 million views in 5 days. Shared on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. It sparked a national conversation, not just about banking, not just about racism, but about the bystander effect, about the moral rot of watching pain through a screen. Comments flooded in, people sharing their own stories of being silenced, people admitting their own shame, people promising to do better. Lawrence made sure Wesley never saw the comments. The internet is a volatile place for a child. But he told him about the impact. "You changed people, Wesley," Lawrence told him, one night over dinner. "Strangers will never meet. They're thinking differently because of how you stood your ground." Wesley pushed his peas around his plate. "I didn't try to change anyone, Uncle Lawrence. I just wanted to check my balance. That's how real change happens, champ," Lawrence smiled. "Not because you try to be a hero, but because you refuse to let the world break you." The immediate storm had passed. Bradley was gone. The bank was changing. The scholarship was established. But as the leaves began to turn, in Central Park, marking the end of that tumultuous year, Lawrence knew something. For Wesley, the real journey was just beginning. The money was safe, yes, but the lesson about character, dignity, and the weight of a legacy, that was something Wesley would have to carry every single day. Lawrence watched his nephew, doing homework at the kitchen table. A lamp cast a warm glow over that concentrated face. He looked under the table at the boy's shoes. New, clean, sturdy, ready for the next step. Talent is distributed equally, Lawrence Brooks told his board of directors, his voice echoing in the glass-walled conference room. Opportunity is not. We are in the business of changing that. The Eleanor Brooks Memorial Scholarship didn't just exist, it thrived. Over 8 years, 14 full-ride recipients walked across graduation stages. Teachers, guidance counselors, principals, an army of educators rising from the same zip code where E. Eleanor had graded papers for 4 decades. Her legacy multiplied. But the ripples of that November morning went far beyond a scholarship fund. Jerome Davis retired from the bank 3 years after the incident. He handed in his badge and his gun. But he wasn't done protecting people. He took a job as a school resource officer at a local high school, a different kind of security. He wasn't there to protect assets. He was there to protect futures. Every time he saw a kid sitting alone in the cafeteria, every time he saw a bully cornering a freshman, Jerome thought of Wesley. He thought of the boy shivering on the bench, and every single time Jerome stepped in, he never stayed silent again. Not once. Diane Ann Campbell, the woman who had frozen in the lobby, found her voice, too. She joined the bank's community advisory board. She started volunteering at high schools, standing in front of auditoriums of skeptical teenagers, talking about courage. I was a bystander once, she would tell them, and the room would fall silent at her vulnerability. I chose to stay quiet because I was afraid of making a scene. It is a choice I regret every single day. Don't make my mistake. Your voice is the only weapon that matters. And Chelsea Morrison, the teller who had smirked, she found her redemption in the trenches. She quit finance and went into social work. She spent her days in cramped offices and living rooms, fighting for families, drowning in red tape. Families just like the ones she used to dismiss. She was overworked, underpaid, but she was clean. She never forgot how close she had come to losing her soul for a paycheck. As for Bradley Whitmore, he became a ghost. Some rumors said he moved to Arizona, changed his name, and started over. Others whispered he was working the night shift at a logistics warehouse, scanning packages in silence. Nobody knew for sure. He had been erased from the world of influence he so desperately craved, and perhaps in a way that was the most fitting justice of all. But the story doesn't end with them. It ends where it began, with a boy and a pair of shoes. 8 years later, the sun was setting. Over the Gothic spires of Georgetown University, the campus was alive with the buzz of the future. Freshmen moving in, parents saying goodbye, the air thick with possibility. Wesley Brooks stood at the window of his third-floor dorm room. He was 18 now. The thrift store jacket was gone, replaced by a fitted hoodie. He had filled out, grown tall, shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of his history. He pulled a laminated piece of paper from his desk drawer. He didn't need to read it. The words were burned into his DNA. My brave Wesley, never let anyone make you feel small. You are worth more than they will ever know. Dignity is not given, it is carried. He had carried it through the worst day of his life. He had carried it through middle school, through high school, through the honors classes and the late-night study sessions. His phone buzzed on the desk. Uncle Lawrence, first day of the rest of your life, champ. How are you feeling? Wesley smiled and typed back, ready. Grandma would be freaking out right now. Uncle Lawrence replied, she's with you, Wes. She's in the room. Wesley put the phone down. He looked at the brand new, expensive loafers Lawrence had bought him for orientation. They were nice, polished. They commanded respect. Wesley left them in the box. He walked to the shelf and pulled down the old pair. The canvas was gray and stained. The soles were held together by sheer willpower and memories. The laces were frayed to threads. He sat on the edge of his bed and slid his feet into them. They were tight, worn, objectively ugly. But as he tied the laces, Wesley didn't feel poor. He felt armored. He grabbed his backpack and walked out the door. He moved through the hallway, down the stairs, and out onto the main quad. Students walked in groups, designer sneakers, boat shoes, judging each other silently as freshmen do. A few heads turned to look at Wesley's feet, a few brows furrowed in confusion. Wesley didn't look down, he looked straight ahead, head high, walking with the stride of a king. Because he had learned the secret, Bradley Whitmore never understood. Respect isn't a reward for success. It isn't earned by the logo on your shirt, the balance in your account, or the zip code you were born in. It is the baseline of humanity. It is the minimum tax we owe each other for existing. Wesley Brooks didn't need a powerful uncle to deserve basic decency. No one does. But on that cold November day, he learned something else. The world is divided into two kinds of people. Some measure your worth by your wallet. Others measure it by your character. As he merged into the crowd of students, disappearing into his bright future, he left behind a final question for anyone watching. If you ever find yourself in a lobby, watching someone being humiliated, watching power crush the powerless, which person do you want to be? The one who laughed? The one who filmed? The one who stayed silent? Or the one who spoke up? The choice is yours. It always has been. Dignity is not given, it is carried. So carry yours with pride.